My name is Celestine and I am married to Hilary and the mother of Alethea.
I am Hilary Howes, married to Celestine and parent to Alethea.
I'm Alethea Howes, and these are my parents, Celestine and Hilary.
I grew up in Hawaii and in Honolulu, and I currently live in Greenbelt, Maryland.
So I grew up in San Jose, California, and now live in Greenbelt, Maryland.
I grew up in Mill Valley, California, and now I live in Brooklyn.
I am a costume designer and an instructor, adjunct professor whenever I can get a job, and a fabric artist.
I'm a vice president for and creative director for an entertainment company down in the Maryland area.
And I am a performer and writer.
I'm a cradle Catholic, born into a good Irish Catholic family. I've always gone to church. I've always been a regular Sunday Mass goer. I think if I've missed, it's been a rare occasion. Hilary's a convert and a late convert. And Alethea, when she was little, of course, is baptized and raised Catholic.
I was raised without any religious training, and so it didn't. I assumed that I was atheist until after my transition. I've accompanied Celestine to church on Sundays, and when we arrived in Greenbelt, Maryland, we discovered an intentional Eucharistic community. So that really made an impression on me, and after 3 years of attending that every week, I talked to a priest about being baptized. At that point, I wasn't really converting from anything else, so it was just being baptized and confirmed.
I was born Catholic. I went to church with my mom every week for the first 17 years of my life. I have since left the church, but we spent a lot of time talking about the teachings of Christ and Catholicism. So I think that it still informs my sense of morals and values a lot. I never felt a particular sense of community in Catholicism, and the more I grew aware of sort of the dogma of the church, and especially with the last pope, I became less and less happy with sort of the popular image of Catholicism. You tell people you're a Catholic, and there's a very specific set of assumptions that go along with it, and they never really applied to me. We've always been a very accepting family. We've always been very accepting of all lifestyles, and that doesn't really go with the normal image of what Catholicism is. And it became harder and harder to identify as a Catholic when it was being associated with so much hate and so many just ugly incidences. Growing up in a family that was so accepting of all lifestyles, and having so many friends who were trans or gay or queer in any kind of way, it made me feel uncomfortable being associated with a church that was considered to be not accepting of those lifestyles. Growing up in our household was very happy, usually very loving. We were sort of the weirdos in our community, being the theater people, but I never really had a problem with that. I never felt a need to rebel against that, because I was always very happy with my parents.
We met at San Francisco State. I was a graduate student, and I was a graduate assistant in the costume shop, and Hilary was taking the costume class. And what actually drew me first to Hilary was her sense of humor.
But it was really a summer theater where we got together. I wasn't looking, and she wasn't particularly looking for anybody, but we started spending a lot of dinners together, and something grew. We really connected in a very deep way, spiritually, and in terms of our values. And that was something that we identified, is that people can be very different in many ways, but And you know, she's better at some things, I'm better at others, but in sharing those same values is something that we really connected deeply on and knew that was going to hold us together over in the long term.
I actually was the one who asked Hilary to marry me. And I
that
believe
was
the
in-
response
that was
was,
in
sure, why
December.
not?
So our marriage has lasted 37 years. I think got off to a really good start, and because we took time to get to know each other, I think, even though everyone was surprised that we got married in a hurry, but there was no child on the way. But it was 5 years before we were blessed with a child, and so we really did have time to get to know just each other. We've done so many things that challenge so many marriages. We've traveled internationally together. We've remodeled houses. We have, well, I changed my gender, and that breaks up a lot of couples.
But not yours.
Not ours. The time of knowing when I was transsexual is kind of hard to put sometimes, because as a child I understood that I was different in some way, and I actually recall praying to a God I didn't believe in to let me wake up a girl. And back then, back in the 50s and 60s, we didn't have any terms or words to describe this kind of thing, and so I didn't have any kind of understanding of what that really meant. Back then, if you were born male and wanted to be a female, but wasn't attracted to men, then you were considered a cross-dresser, a heterosexual cross-dresser. And so for much of my life, I assumed that was it because I wasn't attracted to men. But when I got into my mid-30s, it was really Celestine who said, I think you need to deal with some gender issues. I think there's something going on here. And so I found a support group. I did a lot more reading, and I got involved with a support group relating as a heterosexual crossdresser. We would do these trainings for college students, and so I would go on a panel, and that panel would include a crossdresser and a transsexual, and sometimes a male to female transsexual, and sometimes someone who identified as bigendered or androgen. And so it was through telling our stories, really, to these classes so that they could get a better understanding of the range of gender expression, that I was listening to the transsexuals' stories and realizing that was really much more me than what I was portraying. And so that's when it started to dawn on me. It was really our trip to Disneyland for my 40th birthday. Disneyland had always been a treat for us. It was about 5 hours away, so we would go down there while Althea was growing up. And for my 40th birthday, my treat was that I would get to dress as a woman for the entire time. We thought that being away from our area, we wouldn't meet anybody, wouldn't risk meeting anybody that would discover me. And so over that weekend, there was a lot of trepidation going there, and we were wondering, well, how would people react? And I didn't have an idea that I would pass as a woman back then necessarily. And so what happened is absolutely nothing. There was no discovery at all. There was no reaction to two women with one girl, and there was no reaction to me going to bathrooms or anything like that. And so it was really on the ride home, where I was going to have to dress as a man again, that it occurred to me that I was going to need to transition if I was going to be able to navigate life in a mode that was really more normal and natural for me. And that was kind of heartbreaking, because at that point I realized that as important as it was for me to be a woman, it was still very important for me to be a wife to my wife and a parent to my daughter. And I couldn't really understand how I could navigate those relationships and with that identity. Now you've got to remember that was the mid-90s, and so it was still unusual, I would say, to have two women parenting a daughter, and so that took some work.
There were points at which it was like, okay, where is this going? What is happening? And because we had a daughter, I felt if there was going to be a major change, it would be lovely if it could wait until she grew up and didn't have to go through that with us. But it also became more and more obvious that the drive, the need, the psychological and physical need that was happening was so intense. It was, in some ways, it was like giving birth. Mm-hmm. It was so intense. The force of it was so powerful that there was a time in which I suddenly realized this is going to happen no matter what, because it has to. It has to happen. So it wasn't easy. It was harder for me, I think, as personal identification of who I was, as opposed to who Hilary was. I could accept Hilary becoming Hilary. Mm-hmm. It was harder for me to accept that I was now going to be viewed as a lesbian. And it wasn't because I have a problem with lesbianism, it's just that that's not me. We spent a year in therapy. Mm-hmm. First with a therapist who said marriages never survive a transition, never. At which point we both came out and said we need a new therapist. Luckily, being that we were in San Francisco, there were several, and we found one who was really good. And after our first session, she said, "It's obvious you love each other. You just need to figure out how to deal with this." And we did. It wasn't easy, and it was, I think Alethea is going to write a book at some point about.
Well, I was about 10,
mm-hmm.
I think, when you
Right.
told me that you like to wear women's clothing. And to be honest, I don't remember that moment. I do remember about a week later, I woke up in the middle of the night and saw you in a
Mm-hmm.
nightgown.
Right.
And I remember thinking, well, I'm glad she told me, otherwise I would think this was weird. And I guess I'd grown up with so many people who were different from, normal society, that I didn't really think it was weird as long as you told me about it. And I knew that it was something that I shouldn't tell other people, but I never really thought of it as alienating.
Mm-hmm.
By then I was in middle school, and it was harder then because when you're at that age, when you're 12, that's when people really start to enforce that idea of normalness, and it's something that you feel like you should want. So it became more and more difficult for me. Mm-hmm. So there was a day sort of near the end of the school year where they sat me down and said, Hilary is going to be living as Hilary. So I spent, a summer being 12 and being angry and how could you do this to me, blah, blah, blah. Because when you're 12, everything is about you.
My Catholic roots were very crucial to our staying together. Marriage to me was forever. And I would not have gotten married if I didn't believe when I stood there saying, I do, that this was forever. I'm a very passionate person, but when I say passion, I mean passionate about everything. And when I say something, I mean it. And I meant it. I meant that this was forever. I'd found the person I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. So when we got to that transition point, that was a major factor, was that this person wasn't changing. The interior person was still the same. It was an exterior change. And that didn't matter. I didn't marry the gender. I married the person. And so definitely the fact that I had that upbringing, and that marriage had always been put to me not as, it wasn't about the big wedding, it wasn't about the fancy dress, it wasn't about anything, it was about being with this person forever.
What's normal for people wasn't really important to us. What was important to us is being together the rest of our lives. It's a real challenge to the church, and it's a challenge the church needs to take up and show a radical acceptance of people who are marginalized by others. I think that that's a real calling for us in the church now, and I think the LGBT people in particular bring that to us.
It's important for other people to hear the stories of those who are not like them, and to understand that in reality we are like them. We are human. We are part of the advancement of society. We are part of everyday life. If someone else out there, and this part of this comes from my background, if one person out there watches this and feels better, or is saved, or has a purpose, suddenly goes, oh, well, like, there's somebody out there like me, then that's important. My mother, who is a very spiritual person, always said that we can't change the world, but we can change the person in front of us. We can help that person, and from that person, it spreads out. So I believe that if there's one step I can take to help even just one person understand they're not alone, they're not on the outside, they are part of this world, this church, because this Catholic means universal, that's important for me to do.
And for me, I think it's important that people see that a family as strange as ours is still very happy and still very well adjusted, and that, you know, especially for the LGBT youth who think that, you know, their life is never going to get better or they're never going to be accepted, this is showing them that that's not true, that you can have a very happy, loving family, that you can be in an accepting church. I think that's very important that people know that.
So for me, really the importance of being here is to put a face to these terms. I mean, many people have heard about transgender people, and we see images in the media, and it can get pretty sensationalized. As much as we say we're different, we're also a very normal family. And in some ways, that kind of normalcy, I think, needs to be shared. In many ways, it's as hard to be Catholic in the transgender community as it is to be transgender in the Catholic community. There's a lot of sort of suspicion and wonder and question from sort of both sides. And I think being here and being out about being Catholic and being transgendered is important. So I think that's what really brought us here, to make a difference in terms of that, and make a difference for the church, to help it continue to be relevant in the 21st century. They're going to need to find a way to build some acceptance in, and so we like being that bridge.
One of the things that I think is crucial to the church and to the life period is that there is God in each and every person, and God created all of us. Anything that is created, God loves. Therefore, if God loves everything He's created, that means God loves everyone and everything. He doesn't create things that are to be discarded or to be reviled. If God created you that way, God created you that way for a reason, and therefore, and loves you for that. So to put anyone, any group of people into this is a group that God hates, is wrong. It's not biblical. It's not Christian. It certainly is not something Jesus did. Jesus reached out constantly to the layers of society, to people that other people hated. He constantly went to them. Prostitutes, tax collectors who were really bad in the, in the Israeli world, fishermen, shepherds, lepers, anyone who did not fit in this, in the upper stratas of the Hebrew society he was in, he went to them. He reached out to them, he lived with them. And if we can't live that way, then we're not being Christian.